Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this Donorbox webinar. My name is Jenna, and I am the brand ambassador for Donorbox, and I'll also be the moderator for this webinar today. For those of you who are not familiar with Donorbox, we provide nonprofits with simple and effective tools to manage their online fundraising activities and connect with individual donors on a deeper level. To date, we've helped 35,000 organizations raise over $700 million. To learn more, you can visit us on our site at donorbox.org. Today, we are joined by data viz expert Amelia Combe to talk about making your nonprofit's data visible and useful. This is so important, you guys. I cannot stress this enough. Now, Amelia, she is the founder of Data Viz for Nonprofits, which delivers high-quality visualizations that help organizations to quickly grasp their data, improve their work, and show their impact. Amelia has more than 25 years of experience studying, funding, and evaluating human services. She was a researcher at Chapman Hall at the University of Chicago, which is a policy research center, where she conducted studies on a wide variety of issues impacting children and families. Prior to Chapman Hall, she worked as a program officer at the Sears Roebuck Foundation at the Illinois Humanities Council. She earned her BA from Haverford College, an MA from the School of Social Services Administration at the University of Chicago, and a PhD from the University of Bath. And she was trained in data visualization at the University of Washington. So needless to say, we are in such good hands today, and we're really excited to have her. Now, before I pass the baton over to Amelia, I just want to mention a couple of items. Please note that this webinar will be about 60 minutes long with an additional 5 to 10 minutes allotted at the end for Q&A. This webinar is being recorded, so within the next 24 hours after the webinar ends, you will receive that link via email. Now, you will notice in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen that you have a chat box. Please feel free to drop questions in this section throughout the webinar, and we'll track those and answer as many as we can. And we'll also be sharing several helpful links throughout this webinar, and those will pop up in the left-hand corner of your screen. And you can click those as they appear, and the link will open right up. All right, now, without further ado, please, everybody, give Amelia a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Jenna. It's great to be with you all today. I'm going to ask you for the beginning of this presentation to just direct your full attention to the screen. All right. So my plan is to take you on a somewhat transformative journey today from generic nonprofit staff member to superhero, making full use of your superpowers, or if you prefer, your secret weapons. Okay, so I'm sure each of you have multiple superpowers or secret weapons, but today I'm going to focus on just two of them. And they are, one, your ability, and it's an ability that you share with your colleagues, other staff members, your board members, your funders, and it's an ability to process visual information at lightning speed. And then your other superpower is the data that your organization collects every day. Data visualization puts these two superpowers into action, and it will help you to understand and show what you do and to craft new strategies to improve what you do. So here's the journey, which I've visualized as a sort of graph. This is the journey we're going to go on today. We begin now by discussing the mostly very rational reasons that many people in nonprofit organizations often don't make good use of data. Then we'll consider your 2 superpowers or secret weapons. Then we consider your challenges, and we'll focus on all kinds of challenges, including fundraising challenges, and how to use the secret weapons to address those challenges. And I'll draw to a close by pointing you to resources that will allow you to hone your secret weapons beyond this workshop. And then we'll open it up to questions, as Jenna mentioned. So a little bit more about me. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Jenna. I love evidence, but I hate spreadsheets. I've spent more than 25 years studying, funding, and valuing human services, as already mentioned, mostly as a researcher at Chapin Hall, which is at the University of Chicago. At Chapin Hall, I worked with a lot of organizations and their data, and came to know the difficulties that many organizations face in using data well. I felt there had to be a way for organizations without high-level data analysis skills in-house to extract meaning quickly and painlessly from their data and to put it to work for them. And that's when I got interested in data visualization, or data viz for short. I now help nonprofits, consultants, and foundations to visualize their data through my consulting business called Data Viz for Nonprofits. Okay, so subject number 1 on our journey, why you don't use data, or more correctly, why you don't use it as effectively as you might. In my working with organizations, I've come across 6 primary reasons, and let's talk about each one. So reason number 1 is data naivete or aversion. Nonprofit staff tend to have expertise in such issues as the environment, the arts, health, education, but not data analysis. Some have a downright data aversion. They admit, or maybe even proudly proclaim, that they're not numbers people. Nonprofit staff often don't have time for data. Of course, we're all struggling to stay afloat, to submit the next funding proposal, to maintain our programming, not to mention addressing the huge and varied needs of our clientele and cultivating donors. And digging through data really gets put on the back burner. Some understandably worry what the data will show. Nonprofit staff may fear that they won't be able to control the story, or that the data will be taken out of context, that they'll be compared to other organizations which aren't indeed comparable. They fear that funders will withdraw support based on data, no matter how much a funder might talk about things like continuous quality improvement and such. Some nonprofit staff have nonprofit organizations have low-level staff entering data into management information systems or spreadsheets. Other organizations have multiple staff members entering data, and each person's entering data a little differently. And the result can be what we call dirty data. That's data that is inaccurate because it's not been entered in a consistent way. So for example, if a participant is entered twice into a database, once as Michael Smith, and then again later as Michael B. Smith when he drops out and rejoins a program, for example, then tracking this participant's progress is going to be really difficult, because as far as the data is concerned, he's 2 different people. All right, so many nonprofit staff have data on their participants and financials, but they often lack data to show impact. So for example, a tutoring program may not have their participants' school grades or test scores, because for FERPA reasons, federal government regulations, it's hard to get that data out of school districts. Also, an employment program may not have data on former participants' wages over time. This kind of data can be hard to get because it requires tracking down former participants and surveying them. Other outcomes are harder to quantify. Again, it may require a survey, which is time-consuming and expensive to conduct. And then finally, rather than having a central management information system, smaller nonprofits and nonprofit staff may store their data in separate Excel or Google spreadsheets. So Michael Smith's demographics might be on one sheet and his attendance in various programs might be on other sheets. And that makes analysis of, say, the relationship of age to program participation really difficult because those data fields are in separate data sources. Okay, so we talked about why you don't use data, and guess what one of your secret weapons is? Well, as I mentioned, it's data. So most organizations have lots of data packed away in databases and spreadsheets that they are not putting to good use. Data is the way we know if what we're doing is worthwhile. You can think of it as sort of a tool. We don't invest in other tools, say computers, and then store them away and rarely use them. But that's what we do with data all the time. You know, we're entering the data, but we're not taking it out and using it as often as we should. Even small organizations collect data on many things. Here's a sample of the types of data that most nonprofits collect. Not only participation in programs and donations, but also website traffic, volunteers, financials, audience. Okay, so this is the point in the presentation where I present my little commercial or public service announcement, if you will, about data. So now I understand that you may feel that data doesn't need a commercial. It's already been way overhyped. We hear and talk about data all the time. We hear about evidence-based practices, data-driven solutions, key performance indicators. But in all the hype around data, I think we often lose sight of what its core importance is. So that's why I offer you this little public service announcement. Data is important because of how human perception works. What we perceive is based not only on what we actually observe in the outside world, what we might call data, but also what we expect to observe. And this is how it works. The brain evaluates which of a variety of probable events are actually occurring. And what we perceive is based in part on what decision the brain makes. Sure, what we perceive is also based on those incoming signals from the outside world, but there are far more signals coming from within our brains that affect our perception. So a great example of this is a YouTube video that went viral several years ago. I'm not going to show you the video because I bet a lot of you have seen it, but if you haven't, I'm going to just give you the little 30-second recap now. So if you're like me, you saw it as part of a presentation and the presenter got up and said, I'm about to show you a 2-minute video and your job is to watch the video. You're going to see a bunch of people passing a basketball amongst them. And your job is to count how many times the basketball gets passed. And so if you're like me, you dutifully watch the video, you counted how many passes, the presenter gets back up and says, show of hands, how many people saw a guy in a gorilla suit walk through the frame? And if you're like me, you didn't see any guy in a gorilla suit. And sure enough, the presenter shows the 2-minute video again. The guy in the gorilla suit is very easy to see. But often you don't see that guy because you didn't expect to see him. You were primed to focus on the basketball passes and you didn't see this very obvious guy in a gorilla suit. So these inner brain signals or expectations can distort our understanding of a situation. Thus, the incoming signals from the outside world, again, what we might call data, are quite important to confirming or negating our expectations. But the key is you have to pay attention to data to make that happen. Progress in organizations and indeed in all of human history often starts with the concession that our expectations might be wrong and that data might have something to teach us. Of course, the scientific method that you learned back in the 7th grade primes us to focus on data rather than expectations. We have to formulate a hypothesis and then use data from the outside world to see if our hypothesis holds up. Okay, so that's the end of my commercial, but I also want to include a little disclaimer here. Data is part of the answer, but it's never the whole answer. Perhaps love is the whole answer, who knows? But indeed, data is more about questions than it is about answers. It can show you what questions you should be asking and help you to refine those questions. It can also point you in the general right direction, but you are never going to have perfect and comprehensive data. Data will never take you all the way to your answer. So you should, so you apply data to your own experience to make decisions. Also, we should be wary, although not fearful, of data. We should also always be asking, where does the data come from? Is the source likely to be biased? If it's drawn from a sample, is it representative of the larger population it's supposed to represent? What's missing from the data? Are there groups of people not represented in the data? Are there time periods not represented in the data? And why is that data missing? Are some survey respondents, for example, hard to reach, or do they lack trust in the data collector? So these are mainly questions we would ask from outside data sources, but they might also apply to the data that you collect every day. Now let's talk about your second secret weapon. Remember, it's your visual acuity or visual superpowers. So take a look at these two images. Which image do you comprehend first? The Mona Lisa or the spreadsheet? Okay, do not put your answers in the chat window. I'm going to just take a wild guess that you understand the Mona Lisa first. And that's because our visual system has evolved over millions of years to process images essentially in parallel. So what do I mean by that, process in parallel? It means that we don't read the Mona Lisa from top to bottom and from left to right. We take it all in together and understand almost instantly that this is a picture of a woman in front of a landscape sporting a dark dress and an inscrutable smile. Words and numbers, which only appeared within the last few thousand years, require us to scan individual characters one at a time, recognize them, piece them together into words or values, and then sentences and equations. And while all types of sensory signals barrage the brain is specially geared for visual signals and indeed uses about half of its volume for visual analysis. And that's because for a long time during human history, survival depended on detecting danger, such as predators lying in the tall grass, using our visual systems. So when we use visual cues like length, color, and size, we transfer much of the work that is needed to decode data from the slower, conscious, energy-intensive parts of the brain to the faster parts of the brain that require less energy, that have been more evolved over these millions of years. And that results in more efficient cognition. Data visualizations such as charts, graphs, and maps use these visual cues to communicate data, and thus greatly speeds up our processing of data, and so addresses in part that time crunch that I talked about. Data viz is a quick way to also assess how dirty, disconnected, or irrelevant our data is. If the picture doesn't look right or complete, then we need to do something to improve our data. Maybe that means collecting fewer data elements and doing so more accurately. So now let's test our visual processing superpowers. So take a look at this very simple spreadsheet and try to answer the questions below. I'm really only going to give you a few seconds to answer these questions, which were consistently higher, foundation or corporate grants, and what were the trends for each type of grant. Again, 2 more seconds, because if I show you the exact same data using a graph, it's so much easier to come up with the answers, right? We can see right away that corporate grants were consistently higher. Foundation grants, we can see right away, remained relatively flat over time with that spike in May. And that corporate grants exhibited a cyclical pattern, sort of an up, up, down pattern that repeated itself on a quarterly basis, always reaching the peak in the last month of the quarter and then declining dramatically in the first month of the next quarter. That pattern would be particularly hard to see just looking at the numbers in a spreadsheet. Okay, so not only is data displayed visually easier to process, it actually appears to have more impact. So a June 2018 Washington Post article describes a series of experiments in which data displayed in charts significantly reduced the misperceptions of subjects, both liberal and conservative, on important political issues. So this chart that you're looking at right now shows the results of just one of those experiments. In this experiment, Republican respondents were asked whether they believed that the average global temperatures were increasing, decreasing, or staying the same over the past 30 years. Okay, so the respondents were divided into three groups. Remember, the Republican respondents. There was a control group, and they're represented by the orange bars on these two bar charts. They received no information at all on global temperatures. They were just asked that question about what the trend has been in global temperatures over the past 30 years. Another group, represented by the gray bars, was given a textual summary of the scientific consensus on global temperature. So they read like a paragraph about it. And then the third group, those represented by the blue bars, got a chart showing temperature change since 1940 as measured by 4 climate institutions. And as you can see, the people who saw the chart, again, those people represented by the blue bars, were the least likely to draw the wrong conclusion. And strangely enough, that textual information actually exacerbated the perception problem for Republicans who strongly identified with the GOP. The results were exactly the same for liberal or Democratic respondents on other issues that they might get wrong. They were much more likely to sort of correct their perspective after being presented with a chart. All right, so you have these so-called superpowers or secret weapons. What are they good for? Let's consider what your greatest challenges are, and then we'll consider how to address those challenges with data viz. Okay, so we're going to just focus, we have limited time, so we'll focus on 4 really key challenges that I think most of you can relate to. Showing the need for your services to current and prospective donors and funders, showing the impact of what you do, distinguishing your services from that of other organizations, and evaluating your progress over time and showing that progress to current and prospective funders. All right, so this is really the heart of the presentation, how to use data viz to conquer the challenges that you have. One way organizations use data is to make the case for the need for their services. And I give you now an example from over 200 years ago. It's one of my favorite data vizes, and maybe you've seen it before, it's kind of famous. In the 1800s, Florence Nightingale and a statistician named William Farr analyzed army mortality rates during the Crimean War in England. They discovered that most of the soldiers hadn't died in combat, but rather by preventable diseases caused by poor hygiene. So Nightingale decided to make her case with pictures rather than tables of numbers or prose. In her words, quote, "to effect through the eyes what we fail to convey to the public through their word-proof ears," unquote. Her invention was the polar area chart, a sort of variant of the pie chart. That's what you're looking at right now. Each slice of the pie shows deaths for 1 month of the war, growing larger if deaths increased during that month, and color-coded to show causes of death. So the blue portions show deaths due to preventable causes, the red portions show deaths due to wounds, and the black portion shows deaths due to other causes. The Queen and Parliament could see at a glance the importance of hygiene, and they quickly set up a sanitary commission to improve conditions, and indeed, death rates fell. Nightingale became one of the first people to successfully use data visualization for persuasion, and to influence public policy. Of course, there's lots of different ways to show need. You can show the prevalence of a problem using icons. This chart also uses color quite strategically. And it may make more intuitive sense than a bar chart because we're actually showing people. It's not as abstract as a bar chart where you're just using bars to represent people. So it also takes advantage of actually using 100 people rather than using percentages. Humans aren't so great at percentages, but we could kind of imagine 100 people. Of course, this is kind of visualization you won't want to overuse. You can't have a bunch of icon arrays like this side by side. It will be overwhelming, but it can be very effective on its own. This is what's called a quadrants chart, which shows the relationship between two measures and can be another great way to show exactly where the need is. So I created this chart for a client of mine who was working with a number of school districts to implement what they call deeper learning strategies. And the first thing these consultants did was that they surveyed the principals and teachers at the schools involved in the project, and then they asked them questions to ascertain how important each of the deeper learning strategies were to them and how often they already put these strategies into practice. This chart shows the overall results for all principals and teachers who completed the survey. As you can see, each dot represents one of the deeper learning strategies, and each dot is positioned to show the average importance assigned to this strategy and the average frequency of practice of that strategy. So the consultants could see really at a glance that although teachers and principals already felt these strategies were quite important, they were putting them into practice less than 50% of the time, with the exception of direct instruction. So they could see the need wasn't in addressing the obstacles that were preventing these educators from doing what they already believed was really important. They didn't need to convince them of the importance. All right, here's another great sort of interactive way of showing need. The type of data that people are most interested in seeing is data about themselves. So this is a cool way to put the viewer in the viz. You're looking at a static version of this, but it just asks a question. In this case, I'm just showing you a silly question, which is what percent of accidents in Canada involve moose? And I've been told that actually this is not a moose. I'm not an expert on the difference between elks and moose, so I apologize for that. But you can see, you could ask a question like what percent of people are uninsured, or whatever the issue is that you're trying to show the need for. And then there's a little slider tool where they can put in their guess. And then when they scroll their mouse over the text in the lower right-hand corner, they just get a simple chart that shows them what they guessed, what others guessed, and what the data actually show. So this is a cool way to sort of put the viewer in the viz, ask them to guess, and then show them how they compare to others in the actual data. It can be much more engaging than just throwing a bunch of statistics at people. Another thing you want to show is the efficacy of what you do. Nothing is more effective than a bar chart. It may seem tired and old, but the thing about bar charts is we all already know how to read them. So no one needs to spend any time in figuring out how to read a bar chart. So the cognitive load is really low. So you can see this is a very effective way to show that you reached your goal in March and surpassed it in April. This chart makes an even stronger point by allowing a comparison of the trajectory of one group that got an intervention to another that didn't get an intervention. So we could see the two groups really diverged after some kind of intervention was introduced. Here's another way of showing efficacy. This viz uses a number of great techniques. The chart is called a stacked area chart. It also uses a strategy called small multiples, which is placing several small charts side by side to allow for easy comparison. And it also uses that trick of using 100 people rather than percentages. The notations here are really helpful too. We can quickly see that poverty and child mortality have decreased dramatically over the past 200 years, and that basic education, literacy, democracy, and vaccination have all dramatically increased during this time period. Another thing we like to show our outside audience is uniqueness, how we differ from other organizations. This chart shows a comparison of female and male students on what advanced placement tests they take. So it's not showing nonprofit sort of data, but it's a great way of showing uniqueness. In this case, it's showing how female test takers are unique from male test takers. So if you kind of read it from bottom to top, you see that there are similar percentages of male and female test takers for Latin and statistics and US government. But as you work your way up the chart, you can see that female test takers really diverge in taking many more tests related to the arts and language. Here's another great way of showing uniqueness. This type of visit is called a tree map. Don't ask me why, because it looks nothing like a tree. It compares one organization to others using both shape and color to show the number of clients served. Great way to show that the Youth Together organization serves more clients than all the other organizations combined. Okay, now let's talk about evaluation and planning. That's something else you want to use data for. Logic models are basically what you're looking at here. A logic model is just a flow chart, which is kind of the theory behind how a program is supposed to work. It shows the inputs, the intermediate outputs, and the final outcomes. You may be familiar with logic models. They certainly get a lot of play in proposals, but in my experience, they often collect dust after that. You know, once you've convinced the funder to fund you based on your logic model, you kind of never see that logic model again. So I wondered what would happen if you plugged a logic model into real-time data? Would that be a really effective tool for evaluation and planning? And this is what I came up with. It's called a living logic model. Again, it's plugged into real-time data. It shows progress to date using color, and it's interactive. So you can see on the logic model itself at the top, darker colors show where there's been more progress, lighter colors show where there's been less progress. And when you click on any one of those measures represented by the squares, you get more data in the bar chart below. You can also scroll over components to learn more about the different aspects of the program, and this information can include images and web links. Okay, so you have some data and you visualized it and you want to turn your good visualization into a great one. Well, I have 10 data viz suggestions for improving your visualizations. Let's go through each one. First is to clean data. We talked about dirty data before, and it may seem obvious, but before you ever visualize your data, take a look at it, look for missing data, duplicated data, formatting issues, for example, with dates. Everything rides on the quality of your data, so don't skip this step. Number 2 suggestion is to encode thoughtfully. So what do I mean by encode? So encodings are sort of the visual cues that you choose to represent the words and numbers in your data. And researchers Cleveland and McGill, as well as some others, have studied what types of encodings people are able to decode most accurately and rank them in the following list. So you can see that we make the most accurate comparisons when we're presented with, for example, lengths along a common scale. We're actually pretty good at length even if it isn't along a common scale. But we can only make pretty generic general comparisons when we are encoding data using color hue, volume or color intensity. So for example, if you show me a shade of green, 2 shades of green, I'd be hard pressed to say that one shade is twice as dark as another. But if you show me 2 bars, I could much more confidently say that one bar is about twice as long as another. So I can make sort of those more accurate assessments. So when you want your viewers to make those accurate assessments, use the kind of codings towards the right-hand side of the spectrum. But when just generic comparisons are sufficient, you can use the encodings towards the left-hand end of the spectrum. So pies, of course, are delicious, but pie charts are often inscrutable when applied to data. So look at this image. The pie chart and the bar chart are showing the exact same data, and we can confidently proclaim that the E bar is the tallest in the bar chart. But we'd be hard-pressed to pick out which of those pie slices is largest. E, D, and C look about the same to me, and that's because we're not so good at angles. So when we're comparing the quantities of several things, bar charts are almost always better than pie charts. The only exception is when you want to compare a part to a whole. But once you get beyond 2 or maybe 3 slices of pie, I would say skip the pie chart and dust off the trusty old bar chart or use some other type of chart. Okay, suggestion number 3 is to highlight what's important. Once you've visualized your data, the story can still remain hidden, particularly to those unfamiliar with the data. So that's when it's time to call out certain data points with color and annotations, as I've done in this very simple bar chart. Here is some data from the CDC on chronic illness, which shows an example of highlighting what's important in a chart. This kind of chart is called a parallel coordinates graph. It shows the level or amount of something across several dimensions. In this case, we're looking at the percent of adults with chronic illnesses across states in the United States. Each line represents a different state, and as you can see, along the x-axis or the horizontal axis, we have a number of different dimensions, in this case, different chronic illnesses. The notations in color draw attention to how low residents of Hawaii are in relation to other states on rates of depression, particularly in comparison to Oregon, which has the highest rate of depression. So I'm just calling the comparison I want the viewer to make is between Hawaii and the rest of the states. So I just colored it in Hawaii and made the rest of the states gray. This is actually interactive visualization where you can highlight one state and compare it to all the other states. In this case, I just have Hawaii highlighted. Okay, suggestion number 4 is to show order. Ordered data should be shown in a way that our perceptual system intrinsically senses as ordered. Conversely, unordered data should not be shown in a way that perceptually implies an ordering that doesn't exist. So what you're looking at here is a bunch of bar charts on top and on bottom. The ones on top show the exact same data on the ones on bottom, but the ones on bottom are, the bars are ordered in descending order. What we're looking at is the percent of health visits that included depression screening across different care teams in family medicine, pediatrics, and women's health. And when the bars aren't ordered, it's much harder to pick out, which teams did the best, which teams did the worst. But when I do it in descending order, it's much easier to make those comparisons among teams. My next suggestion is to clarify rather than confuse with color. So don't use the same color hue for 2 different variables on the same chart or on side-by-side charts. Don't use the same color saturation for different magnitudes of the same variable. Again, in side-by-side charts. Don't use too many color encodings on one page or dashboard. And bright, fully saturated color is kind of like yelling. You don't want to yell all the time. People will think you're crazy and stop listening, right? So Moderate color as you would moderate your voice. Only yell when you have a really important point to make, and then provide all the other information in softer, less saturated colors to provide contrast. So here is a data dashboard that sort of breaks all the rules that I just talked about. It's really, it gives me a headache just looking at it. It's using the same colors to mean different things in side-by-side charts. It's using lots of bright, fully saturated color all over the place. It's really just kind of a mess and very hard to read. If these two color arrays looked the same to anyone, it might mean that you have red-green color blindness. So the chart on the right shows the full rainbow array of colors, and the chart on the chart on the left shows the full array, and the chart on the right shows what that array looks like to someone with red-green color blindness. Fun fact is that 7 to 10% of men are red-green colorblind. It's a much lower prevalence in women because it's actually a trait that exists on the X chromosome, and the chances of it being on both X chromosomes for women are really low. But because a sort of significant portion of the population has this problem, we should keep that in mind when color coding our data, color coding our charts. If you put red and green next to each other, it could undermine the value of the chart for a lot of people. These two maps show CDC chronic illness survey data, the survey data that we were looking at also in those parallel coordinates graph. And it uses what's called a diverging color palette to emphasize contrast. So the blue shades show where the states in which rank high on 2 health indexes. So basically the blue shades show where there are healthier adults. The darker the blue, the higher the percentage of healthy adults. Similarly, the orange shades show where there are lower, fewer people who report healthy lifestyles. And then the gray tones are somewhere in the middle. So by using this diverging color palette, we're able to pick out, for example, corridors of poor health in certain parts of the country. Okay, number 6 is to delete the unnecessary. If you've read anything by Edward Tufte, who's sort of the grandfather of modern data visualization, you know about the data to ink ratio, which should be as close to 1 as possible. Today, we might think more about the data to pixel ratio. But either way, it's a good thing to keep in mind. It means that we should eliminate non-data ink or pixels to help make a visualization look more clean and to focus attention on the key data points by eliminating distractive visual elements. So here's, again, same chart on top and bottom, but on the chart on the bottom, I've removed the grid lines, the data labels. I've even removed the color legend and just directly labeled the lines. With fewer distractions, viewers can compare the two trends much more easily. This adjustment comes from Tamara Munzer at the University of British Columbia. And she talks about how those 3D charts, those options you see in Excel, for example, lead to distortions and really make it more difficult for us to understand the data. So here's an example. Again, the chart on the left and right are showing the exact same data. But the chart on the right uses a drawing technique called foreshortening, in which you reduce or distort in order to convey the illusion of 3 dimensions. So parts that are supposed to be perceived as closer in space are made larger, so that red slice is made larger in this pie, and parts that are supposed to be perceived as farther away are made smaller. Those are the the green and blue slices. And as you can see, the angles represented on the 2D chart on the left are distorted on the 3D chart on the right as a result of that foreshortening, making it difficult to judge the relative size of the slices. Another technique to create the illusion of 3 dimensions is to obscure some objects with others to make it appear that some are in front of others. But of course, this is a problem for accurate assessment in data viz. In the top chart, the green bars are barely visible. Rather than have that third axis, you can just use color, which the charts already are using, to distinguish those 3 groups, A, B, and C. Really, that third axis is totally unnecessary. And in the chart in the bottom, it's much easier to determine that the A group was higher in October than it is using the 3D chart. The A group was higher than the C group, I meant to say. Okay. This one also comes from Tamara Munzer, Eyes Beat Memory, which simply means that it's easier to compare 2 charts that are side by side than to hold one in memory while you're looking at another one. So this is the power behind those small multiples charts that I talked about before. In small multiples charts, a bunch of small charts are laid out together to make it easy to scan over all of them and to make quick comparisons. This is a great small multiples chart by Doug McCune. You might want to check out his blog. He's a really good data visualizer. So on the x-axis of each one of these charts is time. So we have the times of day. And then on the y-axis, we have number of crimes. And the daytime crimes show up on the top, and they're represented in yellow, and the nighttime crimes are represented by the blue bars on the bottom half of each chart. So it allows us to quickly see that driving under the influence and drunkenness occur more often during the night, and that suicide and trespassing occur more often during the day. Okay, suggestion number 9 is to zoom in. So when we are showing charts one by one in a series, we should always start with the most general chart and then zoom in on more specific data. So here's an image of a series of visualizations which I created, 2 of which you've already seen using that CDC chronic illness data. So the maps give you a general sense of where there are health concerns according to the data set, such as that corridor of poor health in the Southeast. The parallel coordinates chart helps to compare states on specific illnesses and conditions. And then there's a last dashboard, which I have not shown you, which allows viewers to dig deeper into trends and look at possible predictors of good and poor health using some interactive features. Okay, my final suggestion to you is that visualization is not always the way to go. There are at least 2 situations in which I think a table works better than a chart. The first is that you already have a really engaged but diverse audience. So these folks are highly motivated to access certain data and won't be annoyed by having to find the data that they want on a table. But they're also diverse in their interests. So different people are going to be interested in sort of different columns in your data set. Tables use paper or screen real estate really efficiently. You can fit a lot of rows and columns into a small space, allowing users with different interests to find the data that they want. The other case in which you might want to use a table rather than a chart is when you have lots of units of measure. So for example, you want to show the height, weight, location, and satisfaction level of 100 participants in a healthy eating program. This data involves 4 different units of measure. We got inches, pounds, latitude and longitude, and survey ratings. Such complexity is really difficult to represent in a single visualization because you have to come up with different encodings for each one of those units of measure. But you can do that quite easily in a table. So you might want to use a table under those circumstances. Okay, we're back to our journey and we're pretty far along by now. I just want to mention some resources before I open up for questions and answers. So you might want to check out this website. I think Jenna's going to put the link up for you. Here's just a sampling from an online catalog of data viz software and online tools that you might want to check out. So if you're wondering what you should use to visualize data sort of beyond Excel and Google Sheets, you might want to check out some of these software programs. Also, here's a list of free data visualization tools that are out there. The one that I use the most is Tableau Public. Tableau also has a subscription or paid version, but the Tableau Public, the free version, does a lot of the same things that the paid version does. The primary differences are that you can't save what you create on Tableau Public to your own desktop or server. You have to save it to the Tableau Public server, so it's not good for very sensitive data because it is a public server. But you can make whatever you create invisible to anyone who doesn't have the URL for it, so it's not like someone could Google and find it. Also, there are fewer data connection options in Tableau Public than the paid version. In Public, you can connect to Excel and Google Sheets and some other common data sources, but with the paid version, there's a long list of databases you can connect to in Tableau. I also highly recommend this simple sort of decision tree from Andrew Abella. It's called Chart Suggestions, a Thought Starter. You're also going to get the link for this. It's based on Gene Zelazny's classic work called Saying It with Charts. And the decision tree, as you can see, starts right in the middle. Just asks you what would you like to show, and it gives you 4 options: comparison, distribution, composition, and relationship. Once you answer that question, it kind of leads you through a few other questions about the nature of your data to help you arrive at an appropriate chart for what kind of data you have and what you want to show. But there are some other really good decision trees out there as well. This is probably the simplest, and I suggest you start with it. There's also this data visualization catalog, which is simply kind of like a dictionary of different charts. So you can click on a chart and find out more about what it's best used for. Here's some people that you might want to follow and read. I already mentioned Edward Tufte. Couple other names I'll point out on the list include Anne Emery and John Schwabish. The other people on the list most often visualize more like corporate data or different kind of national data. Anne Emery and John Schwabish focus more on public sector and nonprofit type data. But they're all, you can learn a lot from all of them. Again, my consulting business is called DataViz for Nonprofits. I provide a number of different services for nonprofits to help them to visualize and thus make better use of their data. So feel free to check out my website. You're getting the link for that. Probably the main thing I do for clients is help them to develop interactive data dashboards. I often use Tableau, either the free or the paid version, to help organizations do that. And a lot of my organizations, particularly the smaller ones, really make good use of Tableau Public. I create something really sophisticated for them. At the end of the consultancy, I teach them how to refresh the data if it's not connected to a live data source. And then they're sort of off and running. They don't ever need to learn Tableau in order to use it to show their data. The interactive visualizations I create can be embedded in websites or can be just used for internal purposes. I also have a blog called 60-Second Data Tips. You're going to get the link for this. You can sign up to get a free 60-second data tip each week. You can also check out my website for past data tips. They indeed only take about a minute to read, and it's sort of a painless way to sort of up your data game not even slowly, kind of quickly over time with a small investment of time. Okay, we are at discussion. So I think Jenna's gonna moderate for me and let me know if there are any questions that I can answer, because I'm not looking at the chat window.
Okay. Can everybody hear and see me okay? Awesome. Well, Amelia, that was such an amazing presentation. I am such a data nerd, and this is kind of like data and art mixed in all together. So thank you so much for all this useful information. And everybody, I hope that you're feeling equipped with all the knowledge and tools and confidence to start utilizing the power of visualization, data visualization for your organization. So before we jump into our Q&A, I want to announce that Donorbox has launched an online platform called the Donorbox Knowledge Community. And this is a place where you can get focused answers to your questions regarding marketing, web development, fundraising, board management, data visualization, and so much more. And we are offering exclusive access to this invite-only community for our webinar attendees today. And the sign-up window will remain open for just 30 minutes after this webinar. So you can click the link that just appeared to join. And also, if we do not get to your question today, this is a great place for you to post your question for Amelia. So go ahead and join the community. You'll also be redirected to the community after the webinar ends and utilize all the amazing tools that we have there for you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and see what kind of questions we have. And it looks like we do have a few from Keith here. It says, do some organizations worry about branding with data? So colors, presentation, etc.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Whenever I do work with an organization, one of the first things I do is ask for their style guide if they have it. If they don't have a style guide, I just ask them, what fonts do you use? What colors do you use? So yes, I think it's quite important to use the brand look in the visualizations themselves. And programs like Tableau allow you to, if it doesn't already have your font or colors already in the program, you could import them. You can also import custom shapes into programs like Tableau. So they have all kinds of ways to make sure that you stick with your brand look with your visualizations. Great question.
Awesome. Yes, that was a great question. Thank you so much for that. And Jennifer is asking, can Tableau Public do interactive visualization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the interactive features that are in the proprietary version are actually in the free version as well. So, I mean, it's a really, really strong free tool. What a lot of my clients do who want to use it, what they do is they provide me with de-identified data. So they remove any, if they're providing with data on their clients, for example, they remove their names, their birth dates, of course, social security numbers, addresses, anything that would allow someone looking at the data to identify the individuals in the data. And so once you have a really good de-identified data set, it's pretty safe usually to put that on a public server like Tableau Public. Again, I still wouldn't do it with health or maybe education data, but if it's just like participation data in an organization, a lot of organizations use Tableau Public for that. Also, you should know if you want to use the subscription version, Tableau provides discounts for nonprofits, and for organizations under a certain budget level, don't quote me on this, but I think it's around 5 million, they'll provide some free subscriptions as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that information. And everybody, all these wonderful resources that Amelia has provided for us today, we will include in our post-webinar email. So I know many of you have clicked these links, but we will also provide those for you to explore later on. And it looks like we have a question from Adam, and you may have already answered this. What program, app, or software creates that interactive charts like the moose and elk question that you showed earlier?
Yeah. Yeah, I should have shown a better version of that. Yeah, I use Tableau Public for that. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, that was easy enough. Now let me scroll through my chat and make sure I'm not missing any questions. This was such a thorough presentation, and there were a lot of questions that I had that you answered throughout your presentation. So thank you so much for all of your work with that. And let's see here. Okay. Scrolling through our chat. And I think we're good. Anyone? We do have 1 minute left, so that was perfect timing. And I just want to thank you all for joining us today for this webinar, and Amelia for sharing your passion and knowledge with us. I know I'm feeling inspired. I hope that all of you are as well. And thank you again. We are so proud to provide the tools and resources you need to help you help others. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jenna.